Fantastic, Bryson. This is awesome. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've only ever met Bryson in a shirt and tie way prior to COVID-19. If for anybody watching this in the future, it's currently October 26th, I think it is. I thought I would get a head start on Movember. Seriously, Bryson, this is what I do for Movember. I start cutting a goatee in a little early, and then on November 1st, I shave this bit off, and then, hey, look, heroic overnight mustache. But I've just dialed in, ladies and gentlemen, to see Bryson for the first time just kicking ass. So well done. That's awesome. Bryson, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us where you work, and tell us, why it is you look so amazing right now.
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, I guess to explain for those, typically I'm more in a tailored suit and tie, very close haircut. So I could say kind of like GQ looking. And so this is a rapid departure to go from what you typically see in my bio profile pic to the cyber Moses glory that is here before you today. What do I do? So I founded a couple of companies. 8 years ago, I founded a consultancy called Grim. I like to call them the best team of hackers in the world. Out of that, we spun out a product called SCYTHE, which is an adversarial emulation red and purple teaming platform. I'm the co-founder of the ICS Village nonprofit, where we provide education and awareness around critical infrastructure security. I am a senior fellow at the R Street and National Security Institutes on cybersecurity and national security, on the board of advisors for the Army Cyber Institute, and for another 3 days, I am a strategic advisor to SCYTHE.
And I think you cut your teeth in the Army, didn't you, for understanding, getting your cyber skill set? Talk to us about that. Let's go way back.
Yeah, sure. So I went to West Point, and on graduation, you're automatically commissioned as an officer in the Army. I'm continually amazed at how much smarter everybody is today than I was 20 years ago when I got into the Army. Everybody seems to know, the lieutenants I talk to today seem to know things. And I was just like, I didn't know anything. I spent a lot of my Army career just running around asking questions, and that seemed to pass for leadership. So I did that for 4 years. I got hurt during the war and was discharged as a captain. And I took the first non-IT job that was offered to me. So 2 points there. One, everybody asks, well, how long have you been in cyber? And back then, cyber wasn't a thing. That wasn't a word. I mean, it might have existed, but it wasn't in my world. We mostly ran around with, gold disk images to patch things, to fight worm outbreaks. And other than that, it was primarily focused on the assurance of communications to make sure that we could maneuver and fight. So there you go.
There you go. Fantastic. Well, I tell you, man, I've got a couple of West Point professors coming on from JAG in a few weeks, because I want to understand from the US policy perspective, cyber warfare. Did you ever touch on this just as you were exiting, or certainly you said you were on the council for, what was it with the Army?
The Army Cyber Institute.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I've prepared actually a couple of, I'll go back to some notes that I just started on this whole thing, geopolitical cybersecurity and, cyber warfare. It's interesting to me because, without putting boots on the ground, so without endangering our beloved service people, we're able to effect change. That's a nice way of saying engage in war, and at a fraction of the cost of conventional warfare. Now, my observation, though, of course, is that our enemies can do that too. And, enemies, so for example, North Korea, that wouldn't really have a chance in hell of causing any boots on the ground type damage to the United States, can in fact cause some damage through cyber warfare. And certainly, I mean, it's beyond interference. You think about the Sony hack. This is not just interference, this is damage to our institutions. And I'm not so sure that the general public is up to speed on these kinds of capabilities that nation states and threat actors would have when stealing nation state cyber weapons. You got any comments around that?
Many. How many podcasts are we doing here?
Well, let's give 10 minutes to this subject matter. And then I wanted to dive into a slogan I saw on your website: improve your risk posture and find your cybersecurity blind spots. So I would definitely want to focus on that for today's conversation. But give us a good lead into cyber warfare for a few weeks from now when I get these guys from JAG on the call.
Sure. So traditional warfare is land, air, sea, and space. Those are the four domains. And the way that the military looks at it is, what kinds of effects can I cause using those four domains? And it was called the 5Ds. It's now D4M, and it's deny, destroy, disrupt. I want to say deceive, but deceive became manipulate in the new model. And I can't remember what the fourth D is, but the point is that these are the domains that I'm going to engage those effects, and those effects have specific measurable consequences, from did my attack hit to what was the effect of the attack on the ability to for the enemy to conduct their operations in those domains across those ways. And so, of course, cyber is now what's called the fifth domain. So we now have this cyber overlay across the four physical domains that tie into our ability to affect across, again, D4M or the D5, what we're going to do. Now, a lot of really where this question comes down to is one of deterrence. And so one of my favorite phrases on this comes from, he's currently the advisor to General Paul Nakasone, who runs NSA and Cyber Command. And I believe he ran, or he was a director at the Belfer Center out of Hartford, which is Michael Solmeyer. And Michael said that people in the glassiest houses should not be throwing the sharpest stones. And what we're talking about here is, from a power perspective, the United States is the preeminent physical military, and by all accounts, the preeminent cyber power as well. Also, part of being the #1 economy in the world, particularly in the digital and information age, means that our modern society and business rests on computing infrastructure. You could not be a modern business without scaling it with computers. And what the interconnectivity of the internet allows is, of course, that business to scale and do those things. Part of what I talk about and what we do with the ICS Village, which I co-founded with Tom Van Norman, is we bring in lots of different perspectives around the fact that fundamentally modern society rests on only a handful of things: water, electricity, and finance. You could probably argue transportation as well, but those critical sectors are all, of course, enmeshed with computers now. And there's lots of reasons for that. That's why I said, how many podcasts do you want to have? Because I can have very lengthy discussions on the why and the how of each of those. But the point being that with computer being the easiest risk area, hackers can't hack what they can't touch. And the advantage or disadvantage that we have now, the opportunity that's there, is that since everything is connected, I can be somewhere else in the world where previously I had to be physically present to be able to affect it. And so this is the opportunity of the computer and of networking, is that anybody anywhere can theoretically touch anything. And of course, what can be touched is the question. And this is where we get into this question around the concept of air gaps, which is that something is not directly internet connected, and as always, it inevitably is. It's just under what conditions. And so the point was that through that increased risk and surface area, it is it is possible to affect change in those core components of modern society, and we go to the Stone Age overnight. Now, this leads back to Michael Solmeyer, which is, of course, then, well, why hasn't that happened? And we've seen iterative intelligence campaigns from the states that we would think of, although North Korea is not as active on that. North Korea is essentially just a cyber-enabled mafia state. Their primary purpose is to get hard currency to buy luxury goods, so dear leader and company have all the Lamborghinis and whiskey they can possibly want.
Yeah, whereas the #2 purchaser of cognac in the world.
Where do you think they're getting it? They're getting it and they're getting it through criminal activity.
Yeah.
So using the same point, the cyber component has enabled them not have to run around physically sticking up banks when they found other ways to conduct those criminal enterprise to gain money.
Yeah.
China and Russia, of course, have particular geopolitical thoughts. Iran has a particular perspective, and there are other players as well those are just the big ones that we see over and over again. And they are absolutely conducting operations on critical infrastructure. Now, that sounds really dark when you say it that way, and yet we haven't seen those results, because what they're doing is they're learning. They're hacking and they're learning, and they're hacking and they're learning, and they're trying to see what works, what doesn't, but they're not actually trying to cause an effect that would bring down the infrastructure. And so this was a very long-winded, a whole bunch of context and background to lead to that element of deterrence, is that all of these things come back together, where while there might be the ability to have a cyber effect, the reason that Russia or China hasn't done something is that our response isn't going to be over cyber. Our response is going to be one of those other 4 domains.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so it's right. The punch back is going to be kinetic.
Okay. So
not just computer.
Right. So they're in, and I think it's widely known within our communities that, you know, Russian bots are certainly within our utility systems. I remember back in 2016, there was a massive effort by the NSA to push back ISIS's propaganda fundraising machine. That's what it was specifically targeted to. It was an incredible effort. I mean, I wouldn't understand how we really pulled that together. I'd love to do a show on it sometime, but I don't think that story gets enough follow-up. I mean, because today, over the last 4 years, you've heard less and less about ISIS. And I suspect that that counterattack by our intelligence services to dry up their financing was a massive hand in that. The case in point of the fact that we don't need to put boots on the ground. I think also when Iran shot down our drone over the Strait of Hormuz, I think it was, our response was a cyber response. And it was a very interesting one, because to my understanding, and please confirm this, and I've got DuckDuckGo ready to go so I can fact check myself, but my understanding is that what we did were, through a cyber attack, we're able to take their entire missile defense system down nationally, so that anybody could have bombed Iran and they wouldn't have had a chance in hell, but nobody did, which really to me speaks, and you know, here I am praising, you know, the Western societies that we live in, but speaks to the fact that we don't want to go to war. We could, so it's kind of, if I were to be crude, it's kind of like, you know, opening up the door and saying, I could punch you in the face right now, but I'm not going to. Is that what your understanding of what happened back in 2016?
With the counter-terrorist operation, I believe that was called Project Ares, and there was a write-up on it, I want to say a year or 2 ago, where they went in pretty intricate detail talking through how it worked and what they were doing, and essentially they had hacked through the decentralized networks that composed ISIS, found the key folks that controlled certain points around like the web server and communications, and compromised those accounts, and were able to affect whatever they wanted to affect.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I mean, this is the new warfare, and I must admit I'm a bit of a fan. at least, you know, people won't have to get injured, my friend, right? There you go, through this kind of warfare. All right, let's get to this. I want to talk about risk posture and finding cybersecurity blind spots. Okay, first, it's on your website, it's your slogan. What do you mean by this?
So, know where you stand. I think the first problem that we have in security is we don't actually know what security is. We really don't. We have a lot of opinions, we have lab results, but show me a product that definitively provides security. There's no such thing. Show me that your organization is definitively secure. There's no such thing. So the question then is, well, where actually do you stand? What is the ability to measure security? And so the problem is that if we look at what we define security as, security fundamentally is defined by, can somebody do something to me? It's one of the areas that makes it tricky, where it's not like I want to go and impose my will on something and I change physical forces around me to make a bridge and then this happens, or to do something and it happens. This is, I'm putting something there, and what is my guarantee with all of the other billions of people who can potentially do something to this, that they will or won't do something? And the reason for that is the entire attack chain, which again, this is my Army officer background, I simplify this. There are all of these models out there. I believe the attack chain really gets broken down into 3 simple phases. reconnaissance, access, post-access. Learn everything you can about me, get in, then all the things you have to do to accomplish what you want to accomplish. The layperson metaphor I use here is it's like a burglar. Reconnaissance is a burglar who's going to case a neighborhood. What houses look interesting? What houses might have something that I'm interested that's inside them? What's their pattern of life? Do they go to work at 7 o'clock every single morning? Do they come back at this time? What time do they go to bed? What's the, right? Mapping all of that out. Then access. How do I get into that house? If I don't need to, you know, if the door's not locked, then I just open the door. If the door is locked, but there's a window open there, then I'm going to go through the window. Just like in the real world, hackers always pick the easiest path. They're not going out of the way to do complicated things. Most attacks do not involve, like we were talking about warfare, they do not involve these nation state funded complex operations. They're not using O-days, which are vulnerabilities with exploits that have not been widely identified. They're not publicly known. They're rarely using end days, but sometimes they are. End days are known ones where there's patches out there, which means I just have to repurpose code. And as long as you match that and have it patched, I'm in. The most common approach they're using is social engineering, phishing. I send you emails and I just send them emails constantly and we see who clicks and then I'm in. And then post-access is, I believe, the most important part because post-access has several advantages. One, from what the attacker is doing, that's where they're actually doing it to me. So tying it back to that metaphor of, hey, you picked my lock, that's access, you opened the door. I might not like that, but you haven't done anything. You haven't stolen anything yet. Understanding how and what you would steal is your highest ability to control that as an enterprise. And so in terms of knowing where you stand, knowing that element is the valued part. And so what I call that is you're establishing contextual business risk. The who and the what and the how and the why, well, maybe not the why, but the who and the what and the how of all of those components. What are all the different paths? What are all the different ways, which are always changing for an attacker or different kinds of attackers? This is where we get to the emulation component, right? What would this particular Iranian group do? What would this Chinese group do? What would this random criminal group do that's out of Romania? Like all of those have different techniques, tactics, tools that they're going to use, and understanding those specifically against what matters to you is that key component. And so the idea that I came up with is that in the post-access space, attackers actually are confined. They do not have this unlimited like God complex of I can do anything. For the most part, they're actually controlled by the defender, and they're controlled in two ways. One, communications. Attackers can only use the communications that you already use. They can't bring something new to the table. I mean, yes, there are those fringe attacks where they're bringing something extra special in, and there are all sorts of, you know, if that's what the attacker's doing, let's get them spending that amount of money and time doing it versus the basics of there are only so many computer protocols that anybody can talk through on your network. You decide what those protocols are. There's a natural way that those protocols are used in your line of business. Employees are just doing what they're doing. Being able to map that means that you know where they have to go, right? Once an attacker goes to the wire, the communications level, they can't hide. They're a 1 and a 0 like every other 1 and 0. There's nowhere for them else to be.
So
and then that's
is what you're saying, once they're in through the door, you can control their path by controlling the language that they're going to have to use to open up other doors within the network.
Not exactly, but kind of, yes. There are, what you'll find is, yes, there are certainly set paths. So okay. that is a more advanced concept of where I'm building. I'm giving the atomic components right now. Okay. But you're talking the second level of that is once I've identified things like that, there are specific patterns of behavior between nodes, how those nodes talk, when do those nodes talk, what are the different paths of things that I care about. And once you kind of have defined a lot of that, you'll find that those are your choke points that you can start to look at. Because there are key places that an attacker needs to go or will want to go, particularly with particular adversaries, every single time. And so knowing where those are and where they are in your business and how to control them starts to allow you to be able to define what your security actually is. Well,
so tell me why this happens then. So Chinese cyber army, I think they're called, they hacked the US Office of Personnel Management. This is a few years ago. They were in there. Now I'm trying to see where I put the note, but it was slightly less than a year. It was a long time. You think about the Marriott hotel hack that the new CISO found in 2018. It dated back to 2014. I think this is what you're getting at. Now these, I think of them as sort of sleeper cells, right? They got hacked and they're slowly siphoning off information at a deliberately slow rate in order to avoid detection. So what you're saying is you're developing a system to stop them from obfuscating their presence within the network. Is that right?
No, we're so what the SCYTHE platform is doing is we're allowing you to emulate all of those adversarial possibilities.
Ah, right. So
right. So we let you play the bad actor.
Okay.
And what it is you have all these tools, you have these people, they're in a protection, detection, and response phasing. And the question is, well, where do you stand with that? And we allow you to not only define that, but dial it in. And the thing that we do that's unique is we allow you to recreate the actual threat. So you can go and you can hire a penetration tester or a red team or an independent purple team. And we can talk about what purple teaming is. I like to think of it as the next step of red teaming. So a red team is, I'm hiring these folks, or I have these folks internally, and they're going to attack me. Now, the best way they're supposed to do that is that they're supposed to, adversary emulation, replicating specific threats or tied to specific goals. And so there's kind of an asterisk of sometimes whether you're getting that or not getting that. But fundamentally, go away, do thing, come back, give me report of all the things I need to fix that you found.
Right.
Purple teaming is saying, hey, instead of going away and doing that over a period of time, let's do it together. So offense and defense sit down together and in a milestone approach, walk through each technique that they want to test across the enterprise of a particular adversary. Oh, the first thing the Iranians do after they land is they do this. Okay, let's do that at these places. Did you see it? Did you see it? Nope. All right. And then we start wiring those detections in. Once they do that, then we take the next step. Well, after they do this, they try to pivot here. Okay, what does that look like? And you keep in a collaborative milestone-based approach, keep walking your way to improve defense as you're understanding the adversary. Okay. So tie that back to the SCYTHE platform. We allow you to actually build what looks like the bad actor. It's not a checklist. It's, we call it synthetic malware, where this is actually the bad actor, and the bad actor is trying to collect real information, or you can simulate ransomware. And when we talk about lateral movement, the bad actor actually tries to do lateral movement. And we've built this where it can safely do this in the production environment, which is critical, because if it's not in production, one, you can always cheat on your technical controls. It's like, well, we have it looking for everything possible. Well, you can't put that in the real world because that shuts down operations. And then the other part is the largest risk surface area of any organization are the people. And so if you can't see how people are naturally using these computers, and by the way, I always like to joke, the best hackers in the world are your own employees, because any security control that you put in front of them that makes it harder for them to do their job, they're going to circumvent it. And you want to be able to see that. You want to be able to understand that, like what's really happening in the real world, so that you can understand, because that's where the attacker is going to go. They're not trying to steal your data from the lab. They're trying to steal it from where you're actually at.
Right, and your personnel are going to use it from where they're at in a similar fashion, getting around any type of system that you put in play. That's really interesting. So now you've mentioned something fascinating. You said it's almost like a fingerprint, let's call it, of the Iranians or of Russians. Are they really that different? Like, can you tell, kind of like a language, right? That's definitely a Russian type of behavior. That's definitely a North Korean.
So yes and no. Now we're getting down another rabbit hole, which could be an entire podcast by itself, which is around attribution. Okay. So there are definitely indicators of different kinds of adversarial tradecraft and tooling. Now where it gets confused is that adversaries will intentionally try to look like other adversaries, so false flag operations. So we've seen the Russians reuse Iranian tools and tradecraft to try to look like the Iranians when it was the Russians. So that's one part of it. The second is that there is a lot of reuse of industry available or commercially available offensive tool sets, which is a whole other rabbit hole of discussion. But there are things that are out there, and adversaries will also reuse them, whether that is a professional tool that's for sale, whether that's things that they buy off the underground and repurpose, trying to look like a criminal organization, or the fact that there's a lot of research tools that are put out there and they work. So why would I rebuild my own when I can reuse that?
And how are you building this database? I mean, are you just building the database organically yourselves of these profiles of different threat actors, or are you picking that information up from somewhere?
Several answers to that. What we figured out, this is what I was trying to explain before with the atomic components, is that attackers have to communicate and they have to execute certain capabilities on host to accomplish their goals. So we just turned that into little Legos, right? This way of communicating is a Lego, this way of communicating is a Lego, doing this on a host is a Lego. And you have the ability to put those Legos together in any permutation, in any order you want, pre or post compromise, which allows you now to have this ability to start to look like what any adversary would ever do before or after they get on host. And I keep phrasing that before and after point, because adversaries work in phases. It's not like they just throw their crown jewels malware down and they're like, oh, I'm done. They'll bring down something, and then that'll bring down something, and then that'll bring down something. And there's a lot of this like kind of growing of its campaign, and it changes as it goes as well. I think a lot of people don't realize for what a sophisticated adversary is actually doing in the environment. And so what our platform is doing is just, we provided a common development standard and framework so that you can put those pieces together. And then actually the other month, we launched a marketplace. So any researcher in the world can build modules that can do those communications or those capabilities, those TTPs themselves. So I'll give you a great example of one we just released on the blog today. So Tim Medine of a consulting company called Red Siege, he created this technique called Kerber roasting.
Okay.
Kerber roasting allows you to break the Kerberos authentication system in a Microsoft environment. And so with this Kerber roasting, it allows you to break credentials. Now it's a little more complicated than that, but fundamentally that's a capability. And so he created a module that allows you to pull in a Kerber roasting technique to either mimic or to add and modify to what any other adversary permutation that you wanted to have with this could do. So like that's an example, and it's available for free in our marketplace.
Wow. And you said you do this in production. So how are you simulating this without causing damage? Don't take a super deep dive, but give us some assurances around that.
Yeah, sure thing. So simple technical answers, everything runs normally at user space, which means you're depending on the operating system to treat it just like any other application. So there's no risk of a technical failure there. But more importantly, okay, that's great, Bryson, but what about my information? You said ransomware. How am I not destroying information with ransomware? So an easy example there that we show is the ransomware payloads will land. They'll create arbitrary dummy files on the system. And so we're going to destroy those dummy files. And we'll even interact with the user, pulling down a ransomware note and showing it to them, and all of the things of ransomware, except for the fact that the data that was destroyed or held ransom is fake dummy data. The system still works. It doesn't affect the operator until you decide to like say, hey, you've been fake ransomware. But everything else is all realistic. It's just not on the real thing, even though it's right there.
Do you try to lock people out of their systems, or would that be too disruptive?
So again, the system can do any of these things. Yeah. Your choice. We have never found a customer who's interested in disrupting actual operations. We get that all the time. They're like, well, could I do this? Yes, you could. Would you want to? No, I don't think you do.
Right, exactly. You mentioned phishing a few moments ago. You're absolutely right. I mean, 0 days cost an absolute fortune, and pretty much I was about to say they get to be used once. Do you think that's accurate? A 0 day? No, really? How many times can a threat actor sell a 0 day and it be still valuable?
Okay, so again, lots of questions in a simple part there. So first is, of course, how long does an O day last? It depends, right? O days last until they get caught.
Right.
And as many I mean, you use the example of OPM and Marriott, and how long they were there. Well, let's say that was O-Day that got them in. Let's assume that they could even still figure out where, walk through all that chain a year later to understand that. And then what was the compromise and the vulnerability? It's not so simple. So O-Days certainly are perishable for lots of reasons. If I get O-Day burned because I get caught, then it's done. If a vendor naturally patches something I was using, my O-Day is gone, even though they didn't realize they were doing it. So how long O-Day lasts is that whole question of luck, skill, how widely it's used and shared. O-Day is not often shared a lot. Most folks have kind of their own library. I think probably the interesting thing there is that, and this is a hypothesis because I have not had the ability to go and look at every intelligence community's vulnerability research programs and exactly how they're doing it. Nobody in the world has ever been allowed to do that. That's kind of what makes it so secretive. But I suspect that if you think about everybody's going after the same targets, right? I mean, the common operating systems, the common applications, the common devices that everybody has, those are the common targets. I believe that each vulnerability research program and programs are unique enough because there's so much surface area across these large, complicated programs that I believe they're all finding different things, even though they're looking at the same targets. So there's just this panoply of unknown amounts of O-Day. But as we talked about, they're very expensive. You only want to use them in very particular circumstances. And again, going back to the burglar is going to open a door that's not locked or go through a window that's open versus doing anything complicated.
Do you think 0 days are typically nation states? Are you seeing cybercrime syndicates playing around with O-Days?
Again, it's whatever works. I don't think, so the answer is yes, there are certainly examples of it. Cyber criminals are pretty well funded. I mean, if you think about the way the mafia was 50 years ago of a well-funded, tightly run organization, cyber criminals are, for the most part, are the same.
Yeah, that's right. So where I was going with that is that, obviously O-Days are expensive, so fine, you're going to see them far and few between. You're right, it's social engineering and phishing. I love to ask any cyber expert that comes on the call, what are we going to do about this phishing, right? We've got a lot of technology out there that's super helpful. And yet, if you've got an organization, look at Amazon, 800,000 people, you think one of them is going to click? Of course. Other organizations, even with 10,000 or 5,000 people, you're going to get, the odds are in your favor. And as a threat actor, you only have to be right once. You can be wrong 99% of the time. As a defender, you have to be right 100% of the time. So the probabilities it's stacked toward Vegas, right? Toward the casino. What are we going to do about phishing attacks? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to give you some contrarian wisdom. I actually think offense always needs to be right because the second offense makes a mistake, that entire campaign gets rolled up and burned. Okay, explain that a little bit. So any operator error that I make in the offensive side, right? Because I'm not naturally there. So if this is my entry point and I start working my way through and then these things are working together, when you catch one mistake, you're going to most likely be able to roll my entire campaign like that. You're going to be able to cut my C2 comms immediately because you'll be like, oh, well, it's going there. And all of my things are most likely going to be going there. I mean, it's really hard to have multiple communications. Not that it can't be done. Yeah. So once I make that one mistake, you're going to be able to root me out pretty quickly. Now, again, there's always an always, right? Like it's in consulting, it depends. But fundamentally, one mistake and everything I have is burned. My infrastructure is burned. My tool set is burned. That operation is burned. That's the de facto. The thing I will flip on the contrarian perspective on the phishing question is I don't think it has anything to do with education. I think education is one of the least effective ways of solving this problem. We are trying to get people to not use a computer the way it was designed to be used. Why do we keep blaming the user that they're using email the way it was designed to be used? I mean, absolutely, don't click on the Nigerian scam email. But the reality is that that's not most of the problem. Most phishing is a little bit more sophisticated than that, which is why it works. Every single person I know, everybody can fall for it. I am a hard target. I'm pretty smart. I can still fall for fish, right? Anybody can fall for fish. It's not that easy. So I think, to me, again, going back to where I painted the world simply, fish is just providing access. What we need to do as enterprises is understand, again, how do different users matter? Do they fit in pathways that are critical to our business, and understanding the implication of them clicking on that fish, and what kinds of controls and response can we put behind those to it, right? If Jenny clicks on an email and the entire everything we own gets stolen, that's a problem. We need to figure out how to protect Jenny. If Joe clicks on everything on the planet and nothing really ever happens, turns out Joe's not that important. Let him burn. Who cares, right? I mean, these are the kinds of quantitative perspectives we need to bring to risk assessment, not just everybody's equal, everything is equal. It's particular threats against particular openings in those specific phases to what does it mean to me? Without the business context, you won't have that.
So what can we do about Jenny? And if there is something we can do about Jenny, then why not apply it company-wide?
Well, then how? So simply, response. Response is my ability to have tools and the analysis of the information those tools are collecting to start to correlate particular behaviors that don't fit. So let's focus that on what's happening around Jenny and not on Joe.
Right. So in other words, cut out the noise, right? Because if you're going to apply the, let's say the Jenny rule, Jenny's got access. Jenny needs access to everything. So there's a few, and this is actually a very, very interesting point you're making, because the reality is, you know, maybe the executive, and even then, not all of them need access to everything, right? So what you're saying is reduce the noise by making sure everybody's siloed into their field of responsibility and protect just that silo.
Well, so this is what our platform does, is our platform allows you to generate all of the adversarial noise, so you can cut that out to understanding this is what I am, this is what they could be, this is what I get to focus on. And I understand how my people and my tools can focus on that. And then if you ever do get beyond the Jennies and you're able to grow for your entire organization to be in that, by all means, get there. But I don't see very many organizations at that world-class level. I see a lot of them still struggling to do basic tuning of their tools, configuration management, which we've known around as key to security for 40 years, still is a challenge.
Right.
And without being able to give it context to business, which is why I like what our platform does, because when you do show, hey, this would have been all of our financial data, like there's no question what that means, right? We're not sitting here messing around with, I don't know, is it a blue? Is it an 8.3? Is it a B minus? Like, no, it's all of our financial data. That matters.
Right.
And here's how it happened. And we can focus on that and get better at it. And then with our platform, it's easy to replay that. So you can continue to see as your security grew to that plateau of like, well, we've got this figured out. You can keep confirming that while you start stepping up to additional levels of maturity.
Right. And you mentioned something here that's truly incredible, isn't it? You basically said, I'll paraphrase, just decent cyber hygiene still isn't being done. And I mean, let's pick on Equifax. I don't like picking on public examples because the press tends to blame the victim, right? So that's a crap deal. But Equifax is like, really? Because my understanding from that one is months and months ago, they were told and given the thumbs up to DHS, hey, yeah, we see this vulnerability. I think it was in a Cisco router, if I recall, you know, we're good to go. And of course, they weren't good to go. And this was just an unpatched router. It's like, really? So we're dealing with these fundamental cyber hygiene issues. Now, enterprises have money, they have smart people, right? So I'm failing to see why we are tripping up over, can I say elementary school without sounding too patronizing to the audience? I'll get a few comments on that. What do you think? Why are we in this place, right? Where we're still tripping up over small problems?
Because configuration management is really hard. And it's like so many things in security, you don't just achieve it, check the box, and then you're done. So there are two kinds of companies in the world. Not the ones that have been hacked and don't know they've been hacked. I actually created a different idea. I think there's ones where the leadership cares about security and those that don't. For the companies that don't care about security, where the leadership does not care about security, that means all of those smart people are fighting a system that doesn't support them. They're making business decisions where security is not even the second order decision. It's somewhere way down the line of like, oh yeah, could that have been a thing? Right? There's no amount of tools or people that can overcome when the leadership does not inherently organically support security.
And yeah, you know, seeing a company that I think where the leadership supports security, I wonder if I'm right in saying the CISO would report to the CEO. That should be a telltale sign right there that that company says, yes, security. I'm not seeing that though. Are you seeing that in the marketplace? I'm still seeing the CISO report to the CIO, which to me is bizarre because should the CISO be a technologist? I think not. I think a risk manager. What are your thoughts around that, Bryce?
So that's a whole other podcast. I mean, are we?
Oh, we're touching on all sorts of things. We're just going wherever we please here. This is good.
I feel like this is like the beginning of the year podcast where you lay out like, this is what we're going to be talking about for the next year. And this poor little black unicorn guy who's going to have to set it all up so all the other smart people could come in and like spend an hour on each little topic.
Well, this will be posted on a blog, Cyber Talk, right up here, and of course we'll encourage comments, and perhaps we'll get you back in the new year. But yeah, what do you think about that? Companies that take it seriously, CISOs, CEOs.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to that. I don't know if I'm going to take the shot that CISO versus CIO versus CFO versus CEO versus some other C-level organization. So that's the first time I've ever been asked that question, and I'd love to see the data on correlating what I see as companies that I think have good security versus those that don't against that trend. I think that'd be a fantastic study. And I suspect there probably is some level of indication because typically leadership matches things with an organization that allows the process to naturally flow with those priorities. So I think you're onto something. I don't know the answer though, but I think you're right.
It would be a good study, wouldn't it? Okay, well, let's see if we can pull that one off. Bryson, I know you've got a hard stop fairly shortly. I'm very, very grateful for this dialogue. This was a hell of a hoot. Ladies and gentlemen, I tell you, I haven't seen Bryson since the beginning of COVID. So when he first appeared on the screen, that was just fantastic. I'm doing my Movember thing, getting a head start. So gentlemen, you've got to get that prostate checked. If you're over 45 years old, 1 in 9. Sorry to bring up the subject, but this is why we do Movember. And Bryson, why don't you leave the crowd with where they can find you on your socials? So which socials do you prefer to use? Where can people get in touch with you if they want to follow up?
Sure. So obviously I'm on LinkedIn, Bryson Bort. At Twitter, I'm at Bryson Bort. If you look up hashtag CyberMoses, you will see a bunch of memes. Turns out I am a dead ringer for Charlton Heston from the 10 Commandments movie where he played Moses. So I've just been running with taking a bunch of screenshots from that movie as my entire response to things for the past couple of months. And there's still more beard to come. So we'll see if I can achieve Gandalf or higher status.
And is this staying until coronavirus is gone? Because it might be a couple of years, my friend.
That's where it started. So I haven't had anything cut either on the top of my head or my beard since February when we locked down. And my plan is to go to the end of the year, and then in December, I'm going to encourage charitable giving and have a campaign where the top givers get to choose what kinds of looks I will sculpt all of the hair into. So like different movie characters or different things. And I will try to accommodate as many of those as I can before I go back to the way I used to look that you would have recognized me.
Bryson, I'll pay proper money for you to shave one side of your head and the opposite side of your beard.
See, that's Eddie, that's in scope. You can do that.
Right.
So I'm not picking any particular charity. I just want to encourage charitable giving because I think it's so important that we continue to remember, as difficult as everything is, that there are those who have it far worse. And charity, of course, is one of the best ways to help make the world better for others.
It's Beautiful, man. What a lovely note to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cyber Talk. You'll see some attachments in the notes wherever the team will put it. They'll put it here, they'll put it there. I don't know where they'll put it. It'll be clickable. And we'll be happy to follow up with Bryson in the new year. Or if I'm the top bidder, we'll be happy to follow up as soon as he's got that crazy hair, because that'll be worth getting on video. Bryson, I'm very grateful, my friend. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, always good luck.